Thank you. It's great to be here today to talk about a topic that I find extremely interesting. I wanted to start off with this quote by the Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman, who effectively said the business of business is business, and he believed that social responsibility was checked by businesses by employing people who then pay taxes and so on. And 50 years later, there's actually quite a few people that still believe this, so over 60% in many countries. And then on the other side of the coin, you have this nice quote, I think, from Bridget Anger, who's from AMB BBDO, who says, "Doing good is as motivating to the people who work on the brands as the ones who use and buy them." So we ask how important is being responsible, and if it is important, how do we make it matter? So I think first, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm really talking about what goes beyond what's required from the law for responsibility of businesses. And as we know, it's not a new concept. It's been something that through the decades has come and gone and seen tidal waves of rising and coming and going. So in the 19th century, there was new technology and job creation, which was great, but also unchecked by regulation. And then into the 20th century, there was a big backlash of corporations. Labor unions were formed that gave a bigger voice to workers. And then, of course, in 1962, Milton Friedman's Capitalism and Freedom was published, and then the 80s and 90s, a huge sense in globalization, and then, of course, rising environmental concerns, and the first CSR reports were published in the late 1980s. So all this history, yet there's never been a time in history when corporations have really acted for the benefit of society. But now I think we're seeing this unprecedented, the power of corporations along with your increasingly informed general public. So not only are people, more educated than they were before, but also have the ability to access information better than ever. And it's really creating this threat to the legitimacy of corporations. In fact, back in December, there was a really interesting poll, and as an American, I thought this was particularly compelling. And it's saying consumers have lost trust in corporations. So 42% of Americans don't believe industries are honest and trustworthy, and this has fallen 6% in the last year. And more than a third really want to see more regulation in specific industries, so oil, pharma, tobacco, and health in particular. So we ask, who do we trust then? We know, of course, that consumers trust friends more than they trust brands. So 90% trust recommendations from people they know, 70% opinions that they've seen online, and only 33% of online ads. And I love this great example of advertising. So a man saying to a woman, "I'm a great lover, I'm a great lover." And then, of course, on the flip side, the word of mouth, where the woman's saying to another woman, "Trust me, he's a great lover." And, I don't know about you, but I'm a lot more likely to believe the woman than I am the man. And I think that has a lot of implications for marketers, of course, and looking at that word of mouth and understanding that. And of course, as we know, the digital era has created a whole new way for consumers to express their opinions online. So mass transparency among businesses. You're seeing stuff from employees posting on social media, et cetera, to, of course, the businesses managing their own reputations and consumers that are posting their views online. We're now seeing a trend in consumers willing to actually recommend companies delivering on CSR. So 73% are willing to recommend companies based on their perception of them delivering on their CSR strategies. And also, a majority of prosumers have actively researched a company's ethics in recent months. So prosumers, 85% in the mainstream, 67%. And they also believe they have the ability to punish a company who they don't believe is behaving in an appropriate way. I think the bottom line is humans want to be able to trust the brands that they not only work with, but the ones they use and buy. So, just like you would in a person-to-person relationship, you want to engage in a relationship with a brand that you think is going to deliver on their promises, that, the product isn't going to break in a week's time and you got a fair value for your exchange. And there's a lot of studies coming out that are saying trusted brands actually are the ones that are behaving like people. So the Human Error Index is a great one that has identified 6 qualities that trusted brands have. And The brands who are ranking really high in this are companies like Emirates, and Virgin, I think, is a great example. And while it's quite polarizing, I think some people really love Virgin or they think differently. It is a brand that is very, you see what you get. They're very authentic, I think, and they clearly stand for something. I wanted to share some quick clips of some people that we recently talked to and get their views on CSR and the importance of building relationships that matter with your consumers.
So in terms of brand behavior and how much responsibility matters, I think as a branding person, I'm going to have to say that I don't like the term brand behavior because it kind of makes it artificial. What matters today is that organizations act in a way that is responsible as individuals, and that's really about having beliefs, value systems, and missions that matter. It's not really a branding thing, even though the net result of thinking that way is that you have a strong brand and that your brand matters to you. An organization in the 21st century where customers know everything and will find out everything, every single organization has to assume that they have to behave responsibly at every single point, otherwise they can destroy their brands overnight.
The idea that doing good is good business is, well, it's kind of obvious. It's also doing good is good, whether you're working or not. I suppose the thing that's become clear as some brands and some clients have got involved in things that aren't so good is that it's incredibly important these days. People aren't prepared to be ripped off, people aren't prepared to have consequences for their spending that they didn't intend. So it's good to do good, but I think it's never been more important.
I think when you look at corporate social responsibility, it's really easy to look at it in a lot of different ways. How people treat their employees, how their labor practices exist, what they do to the environment, what is their sustainability practices. And I think it means a lot of things to a lot of people. So I think for companies, really defining a very clear strategy and not trying to be all things is a hugely important decision.
So the old-fashioned way of looking at brands is simply looking at the products and services. But increasingly, with digital transparency, it's important about the company and the people who sit behind the brands. And people want to trust in that company and those people. And so increasingly, companies need to think about what their story is and what the purpose for their company is.
So I think a lot of what they were saying really focuses on the fact that responsibility can counteract this distrust, but the formula needs to be right. And by that, I mean you need to be touching all the different stakeholder groups. It needs to be embedded in the organization. And in case you're still wondering, the 4 companies perceived to have the best CSR reputation are also to be the most overall reputable in the world. So I think that says a lot about the tie between the two. So the key things for brands to remember is it's driven from the top, and by that, again, it's embedded in the organization strategically, looking at your different stakeholder groups. So it's not just about your consumers. You need to look at your employees and your partners and other people that touch your organization. Communicate, and I think the best communicators know listening is a very, very important part of communication. So constantly talking to your stakeholder groups and understanding what their needs and desires are. And humanize your brand by remembering the golden rule. So if it's true that a brand and a person relationship are similar, then I think treating others as you would want to be treated has to be right. So authenticity again is a really important piece of this, and really keeping that at the heart of the organization and how you interact with your different stakeholder groups. At Holland Partners, we use our Engager framework to talk to brands about building relationships that matter, and within this, particularly things like sensing and participation and integrity, which focuses on brand values beyond the straightforward understanding, are really important pieces to helping brands figure out how to make these strategies work. And I think one of the main reasons I was probably talking about this is I've been quite involved in the research industry and different CSR things. And I think it's incredibly important that we look at ourselves as brands too. It's not just about the brands that we're helping, but we each have a responsibility with our different stakeholder groups. And so things like respondents and, with respondents, privacy, fair value exchange, and we've got things like the SMR 28 questions, which are great at looking at this. With our clients, being honest and transparent, and if we get something wrong, being accountable and doing the right thing. With our partners and suppliers, if we're offshoring, being responsible about those practices. Within our own communities, I went to the presentation from Mesh yesterday, and I think they're doing some incredible stuff with Pepsi and South America, and in the way they're involving the community and social responsibility for good and growth. And I think that's a great way for our industry to look at it with our employees. And anybody that's studied a bit around employee engagement knows that the opportunity for employees to give back in their communities does drive engagement with your own employees. So I think that's a key piece to this. And of course, within our industry and the media, being honest and transparent. So with that said, I thought it would be great to, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them, but equally any suggestions or things that people have ideas on in regards to our industry, and things that we can do to give back and be responsible.